Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you my October/Gothtober reading wrap up. So in the month of October I managed to read 16 books and I did pretty well for my Gothtober prompts considering that I had to chuck out my TBR. I didn't manage to hit 2 prompts, and those 2 prompts were Dark Academia and Modern Retelling, but I did manage to hit all the rest of them, and I'm going to talk about the books and let you know which prompt each one of them fulfilled. So the first book I want to talk about is A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schawb, and this is the second book in the Darker Shade of Magic series. This one fulfilled the grey morality prompt for me. Now, the first book, A Darker Shade of Magic, follows Kell in this world where 4 Londons exist, and Kell is an Antari who is the only one with the ability to travel between these 4 alternative Londons. Some of these Londons have magic, some of them do not, and you're not supposed to bring items between the worlds. But Kell breaks the rules when he finds this intriguing black stone, and the story goes from there. I enjoyed the first book, but it still was fairly mediocre for me. However, the second book was mediocre for me and I didn't enjoy it. I think this book very much fell into the second book syndrome category, where nothing really happens in the second book, where the series could have actually been a duology, because the second book has no plot to it that kind of exists within the book itself. It's more so just a lead up to the third book. I definitely felt that, and it definitely dragged for that reason. There were points where things were suspenseful, where it was rising towards some tension happening, but then we got to that point and it was actually very underwhelming, so it felt like it was not as important as the author made it seem. And then when it was rising to the suspense at the end, the whole thing ended on a cliffhanger, and all of that suspenseful action that I was expecting to get in the second book, it's actually reserved for the beginning of the third book, or the events further in the third book, which really disappointed me because it left me wondering what was the point of this second book. In the second book you do get to see a bit more of the character relationships. We have a bit of political intrigue happening within the family politics, and I really valued seeing Kell and Rye's brotherhood. I think they work so well together and their magical bond together is very interesting, but that's not enough to carry the book on its own. And I'm not a huge fan of Lila's storyline. Again, I'm not a huge fan of pirates, so it's not entirely the book's fault. There is personal preference falling in there, but while I was interested in these new characters that we were meeting and the relationships between the characters, it was just not enough to make an exciting book. And in the end I just felt very underwhelmed by reading that whole big tome. At the end of reading it I was like, I'm not going to read the third book. I refuse to finish this series, but I think I will. I'll just quickly read it on audiobook rather than physically. Then we have The Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty, and I buddy read this with Nicole from Who Picked That Book. Nicole was a very lovely buddy reader to read along with, and this one fulfills my foreign country prompt. I'll tell you about the first one, which is where we meet Nari. She is a thief living in Cairo and she's just getting by, trying to con her way into surviving, and she decides to perform this ritual that cools down on the djinn, but she thinks it's all fake, so nothing can go wrong. However, it ends up not being fake. She discovers the existence of real djinn and gets carried away into this world that she never knew existed. And while that's the premise of the first story, so I don't really want to tell you more than that, there's a lot more to this series than that premise ever makes you think. Like, that premise is just the smithereen of the beginning of the story, but there's a whole world hidden in these books. So while this book did not get 5 stars from me, I have to tell you a secret. It's still a new favourite anyway, okay? It's still making it onto my new favourites list even though I can't give it 5 stars. And I'll explain the reason why I can't give it 5 stars before I talk about all the ways I love this book. The reason why I can't give it 5 stars is because this book has serious pacing issues. It's 600 pages and it goes very slowly in the middle, and it's just leading up to one event, and I did enjoy seeing all of the political intrigue and grey morality characters and family complex relationships that we got to see in the middle, but I do think it dragged very much, and a large part of that has to be because Dara gets effective in this book, and I think his perspective is repetitive. His storyline is just repeating the same things and the same inner turmoil again and again, and like not doing anything with that storyline, so that's kind of why it slowed down. That said, I adored this book because it was everything I love in fantasy and more. I'm telling you, when I say it's got political intrigue, the political intrigue is tied into the complex family relationships and also tied into the fact that this is a royal family where there is one throne. And while they all love each other because they are a family, they each have different ideas of what a good ruler is. They're ruling under a tyrant, so the tyrant has got his own idea of what a good ruler is as well. There's magic involved. There's so much politics in this world. This world has such an intricate history and world building that you just delve into, and you really see how the history and what people have lived through ties into the actions and choices that they make in the present day. It was also complex and marvelously done. In the beginning I hated some characters, but in the end I kind of liked them. There are characters that I loved and then hated and then loved again, and there are characters that I was feeling mediocre about and then hated by the end of it. At the end of this book, I just want to let you know some very key points, the main one being that Prince Ali is my husband. I love him forever. I will marry him tomorrow if he asks me. He needs to be protected at all costs. So I thought this was fantastic. The ending, S.A. Chakraborty has endings that will leave you an emotional wreck. And I also liked the themes that were discussed in this one, especially when it comes to war and how it makes monsters of us all and how there are no good guys in war. It's a theme that I just go soft for because I think it's very, very relevant, and also, yeah, it's relevant to real life, and it's interesting to see it in fantasy and how fantasy manages to convey that in many different ways. Has a lot of content warnings, but as always for all of these books I'll have as many content warnings as I can personally think of in the description box down below. The next book that I read was Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi, and this one is fulfilling my Black Indigenous person of colour read for Gothtober. I loved this one. It is a new favourite, and I actually finished it about 2 hours before filming this video. So this one follows Ella and Kev, their brother and sister, and Ella has this power that she calls her thing, which allows her to do unique things. You kind of have to read to find out what she can do. And she has this great power, whereas her brother gets imprisoned in jail, and she knows that she has the power to bust her brother out, and she has the power to change up the game on a lot of things, but she tries to withhold it because she knows that this power is hard to contain. But this book is predominantly from the perspective of Kev, who is imprisoned, and let me tell you, this book is just absolutely amazing for a variety of reasons. The first one, which I think is the most important one, is the themes that it deals with. It deals a lot with police brutality and racism, and how that is an sort of imprisonment in itself when it comes to being yourself, when it comes to the things that you aspire to be and the limitations that you feel you have on how you can live and navigate your world. But it also focuses on imprisonment in jail and what jail can truly be like, not only as horrible as jail is in how they can just take away your rights and how the authorities abuse the power that they have over you, but also what that means when racism gets dashed into the mix. I also appreciated the fact that you also see after imprisonment in a lot of cases, so that you get to see how imprisonment impacts your mental health during imprisonment, before imprisonment, and after imprisonment. And that focus on mental health was one I really don't get to see that much in the jail narratives that I've seen. Well, I do get to see, but not to the extent that I think this book managed to do it in. I also think it did a very good job of just being unashamedly black. It's talking a lot about black themes and the black experience, but while managing to do that, it also just uses African-American vernacular English. And it's just nice to see people like speaking in the way, like the writing is spoken in the way that they would speak, and it touched my heart. This is also an angry book. It focuses a lot on the anger that the black youth and black people feel about what is happening to them and how to wield that anger, if it's possible to wield that anger, and it was just fantastic. Like, I could talk about this book all day and it still wouldn't convey how important and fantastic this book is, and can you believe it's only under 200 pages and yet packs such a punch. Absolutely amazing. After that, we've got Artemis, Fowl and the Atlantis Complex by Eoin Colfer. This is the 7th book that I needed to read in the Artemis Fowl series, and I buddy read this one with Athena. It's very interesting, my journey with thinking about this book, because I originally rated it higher and then I lowered it a little bit in hindsight and after doing some research. So I'll give you the spiel about the first book. The first book follows Artemis Fowl, who is a young criminal mastermind, and I mean young as in child age. This is a middle grade series, and he discovers the existence of fairies, and he decides he wants to steal this fairy gold, which you can only get if you ransom a fairy. So he's going to kidnap a fairy and then ransom it back to them and get that gold. However, the fairies have magic and maybe more tricks up their sleeve than Artemis Fowl is quite prepared for. I will try and speak about this book in vague terms because it is far down in the series. This one deals with a mental health illness which is fantasy based, it's magic based, but it does reflect OCD and dissociative identity disorder in our world. And I did a bit of research on the representation, and for the OCD rep, some people appreciated seeing this because this was originally published in 2010. So mental health rep in 2010, that is way before its time, let alone in a middle grade fantasy series, definitely way ahead of its time. So people who grew up with it kind of appreciated seeing that mental health rep, especially OCD young readers appreciated seeing it. But now it gets a bit more criticism for being a kind of pop culture observation of OCD that's very service level and doesn't delve deep into what it's really like, and it's kind of just falling into quite a few stereotypes. And then the dissociative identity disorder, which they call its old name in this book because it's an older book, so it wasn't called dissociative identity disorder when this was published. They say that the representation of this is very not the best, especially when it comes to using electronic shocks to kind of flip between personalities. So while it seems to be a bit across the board with the mental health rep, it did have it in there, and I took that on board and I just took that in, and I thought I would tell you and then talk about the book. So I did enjoy this one. It made me laugh so much. A lot of people think Eoin is what makes people laugh. I did not like Eoin. I thought he was very, very annoying. It was not entertaining to read about him, but I found when we weren't reading about him, those scenes to be quite funny, just in the way that things are worded, especially when it comes to the butler storyline. I love the butlers with my whole heart. It was nice to see them working together again, and I really appreciated that side of the story. I do think the ending to this one was a bit rushed, and I didn't quite get everything that went on. I feel like it was just too quickly resolved, and therefore it made me like it a little bit less. But the one thing that Eoin Colfer always does without fail is have such high stakes in his books that you never know how the characters are going to figure things out, and that means the suspense is always up there, and I'm always eager to read and just wanting to turn those pages. So this one was a bit of a mixed bag. I think it is my least favourite in the series, but it did bring a lot of good things to the series as well, and I'm curious to see how it's all going to go down in the end in the final book, which I'll be reading next month. I read The Magic Toy Shop by Angela Carter, and we started off on such a good note, and then we ended off it just being so bizarre that I don't even know what to make of this book anymore. So this book follows our main character, and she lives with her parents and her younger siblings. When an accident happens to her parents and they end up dead, she has to move in with her estranged uncle that she doesn't really know, and her uncle makes puppets for a living, these very grotesque, scary looking puppets, and he's a horrible person to live with. So this book was very interesting because it reads like a backwards fairy tale. You know how fairy tales start off with the kind of rags to riches story where you start off as poor as you can be in such a horrible condition, and you slowly improve until you get to be the Disney princess at the end. In this one, the exact opposite happens. She is living her best life and it goes downhill. And it was interesting to see that descent because we get to see a lot to do with classism, about what it's like to go from the top to go all the way to the bottom. And the writing in this one is so beautiful. It's fairy tale-esque and gothic, but it's also haunting and just so atmospheric. I do think it slowed down a little bit in the middle there, but then by the end it was picking up and it was all leading to this brilliant climactic ending that absolutely shocked me because it was not the direction I thought this story was going to go into, and it was kind of one of the things that I don't really like to read about that much, and it just creeped me out to the point that I just felt utterly disappointed in where the climax of this story lay, and I was not satisfied at the end. So I don't know, this story just kind of went from the happy moments to the dark moments, and kind of went from me really enjoying it to not feeling that happy about the ending. I read The Bone Snatcher by Charlotte Salter for class, and this one also fit the prompt of bones because it's got bone in the title, it's got bones all over this story, and it was absolutely fantastic. So this one is a young adult, even though our main character is 12 years old, and we follow Sophie, who lives in this fantasy kind of world. So she gets sent to live in this house with these really creepy twins and this very strange owner. And the house itself is plagued by these sea monsters who want to eat the house, and they have to be fed bones unless they will start to eat the house and all of the people within it. While she's there, she meets this mysterious person who gives her a quest to find this monster box, and it's all about her trying to do that quest and trying to figure out what the people are like in this house. I really enjoyed this book. At first I was a little bit skeptical, but in the end I really liked Sophie as a main character. She was very wild and angry, but she was also very smart and resourceful. And then we have these evil twins that are just so evil and creepy. They were horrifying. We've got a sentient house with all of these like mysterious corridors, and it just goes deep underground, and it's kind of living and moving, and it's very strange. We have these steampunk inventions which are very creepy, and then we've got these sea monsters that are attacking the house all of the time and that have their own agenda. I really liked how it had a gothic house and all of these monsters and creepy elements. That is exactly what I wanted from Gothtober. And while the storyline did get predictable for me in some aspects, I was able to predict at least 2 of the big plot reveals. It just kept the plot reveals coming, so at some point I hadn't predicted things just because I didn't expect that there would be so many things to predict. The ending felt a little bit rushed while simultaneously dragged out, but at that point I was having so much fun that I just enjoyed it. This was a very fun ride, and if you're looking for something a little bit creepy but not too creepy, I would recommend this one. And wow, those evil twins were fantastic. For female protagonist, I read The Water Cure by Sophie Mackintosh, and this one was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize, and this was a new favourite. I absolutely loved it. If you like strange adult fiction, I think you're going to enjoy this one. So we follow these 3 sisters who live on this island, and they've been told all their lives that the water is toxic and that men are evil and you shouldn't let any man near you, but one day these 3 men wash up on their beach. And I'll leave the story at that. It's so weird that I don't think I can explain it and do it justice, but this book brought some very interesting questions to the table about feminism and femininity and love and family. It was very weird because these sisters have grown up isolated from everyone else and so close to each other that their narrative storylines and each perspective that you hear from them almost sounds the same. And I know that when I was looking at reviews on Goodreads, people said, oh, it was so hard to distinguish between the sisters, but that was kind of the point. You're not supposed to be able to distinguish between them because the eerie, creepy atmosphere comes from these women being left to live on this island alone for so long that they can't tell each other apart. And the imagery was just amazing. It was hammered home, these images of blood and water. Oh, I loved it. I loved the imagery, I loved the writing, I loved the kind of ambiguous open end. So if you don't like open endings, you might struggle a bit with this one, but I think it ended on an open enough note that you kind of know where the story's going, but you also are left thinking. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed this, and I actually found myself underlining paragraphs, which, you know, when I'm underlining paragraphs and actually annotating in my book by choice, you can tell it's a good one. I also did the same thing with Riot Baby, which again underlines how good that book was as well. We're getting through my 5-star reads, because now for the disabled prompt, I read Joni by Joni Eareckson, and I gave this one 5 stars. It was a new favourite. So this is her non-fiction story where she's just recounting her own story. Joni went through a diving accident when she was a young adult. She dived into the water, and with her accident she ended up with quadriplegia, and she talks about her journey processing her disability, grieving for her old life, and how she moved forward after that. I do have to say that Joni is a Christian, and she is really taking this story from the Christian perspective. So there's going to be a lot of Bible verses, a lot of Christian contemplating in this one. As a Christian myself, I found this to be very valuable, because even Christians have some very toxic and ableist perspectives on disability. For example, believing that they've sinned in their past life and that's why they have that disability, or they deserve it, or things like that, or they got the disability as a symbol for how God is going to heal them. And this kind of talks about those ideas and unpacks them, especially as Joni herself at the beginning believes a lot of these ideas, and she goes through such a mental health journey. Although this is a story about her coming to physical terms with her disability, also about her mental health and religious journey equally, and they're all intertwined. I was impressed by the fact that she manages to talk about her disability in a way that refers to her personal journey, but also manages to lift those themes and show how able-bodied people need to understand this and be more inclusive, but also how able-bodied people can relate to some of the struggles that she has as a quadriplegic person if they look at it in such a way, and I admired that. I was impressed that she was able to do this. In the beginning it was very much a recount of what happened with just, you know, a bit of her thoughts in it, but by the end it was more of a reflective piece, and I think that transition between it being a count at the beginning and then a reflective piece worked very, very well for what the story was doing. I felt a lot of feelings while reading this one. I felt sad at some points, I felt angry at some points, especially burning anger when it came to the nurses. Of course she comes across her fair share of wonderful nurses, unfortunately underpaid, understaffed nurses who wish they could do more, but then there's also those nurses that don't like their job, who hate their job, and who kind of abuse their position of having someone relying on them for care. Oh, it makes me angry, but I thought this was just such a fantastic book. A review can't do it justice. You should go and read it for yourself. Then, surprise, surprise, for my LGBT rep prompt, I read My Antonia by Willa Cather. Willa Cather is a lesbian, so although this book is not explicitly LGBT+, if you're analysing it and reading it carefully, you can see the LGBT+ undertones in there, and we did look at that in class as well, which I found very, very interesting. My Antonia is a story that's told from the perspective of a farm boy growing up, and he meets Antonia, and it's about what happens when he meets her and kind of them growing up together and living their life out in the countryside and growing older, and it's just kind of their whole life story. Unfortunately, I found this book to be very, very boring. I think if I was a child and I read this, I would have enjoyed it a lot more, because back when I was younger I was very interested in the Little House in the Prairie books and the Secret Garden books, and I was more interested into living the countryside life and the drama that you can get in countryside life. But now I'm not that much of that kind of reader, so it was a bit boring, not that much happens. I appreciate what it's trying to do with the themes of immigration and also about like trying to move up economically and the struggles of that, but it just missed the mark with me because it was quite boring. Up next for the Read on the Cover prompt, I have The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr. This is a non-fiction book about storytelling, and it kind of looks at storytelling from the perspective of a psychologist. What are we doing telling stories? How does that affect our mind? How are our lives actually stories? And then how can you write one with this knowledge of what a story does and how it affects people? You can see, if maybe you can see on camera, but I tabbed a few things here. I do think this is useful for if you want to be, you know, writing it as a craft book for tips and tricks. I liked some of the rules and some of the ideas that I picked up here. However, my main problem with reading non-fiction like this often is it being offensive to certain groups of people, and this one did hit that nail on the head again, because when we talk about stories we often start to talk about creation stories and creation myths, and there was one point where the author calls Native American creation myths rubbish, and there were other times when he's undermining other religious creation stories as just fiction, which is okay. You can think it might be fiction to you, but when you're writing non-fiction books, I think you can say this in a more sensitive way, or you can just retract your opinion from it, because we don't need your opinion. You're supposed to be using these stories as an example for a non-fiction point. We don't need to know your particular view on those stories. I feel like it's very easy in non-fiction to just retract your opinion and get your point across. He doesn't manage to do that. There's only a few moments in that, but it still bothered me quite a bit. So while I do think this is valuable, it did have some things I didn't like about it. It also massively spoils plots when it's given examples, so I actually had to skim read any parts where it really unpicked a certain plot of a book that I want to read. For example, it was spoiling Gone Girl left, right and centre repeatedly, and I had to keep skimming those parts. For oldest purchase, I read River of Ink by Paul M.M. Cooper. So this is a book that's set in historical Sri Lanka, but it's also kind of not exactly historical Sri Lanka. There is a kind of, this didn't actually happen in history, but we're setting a story as if it happened in history function to it. So we're following this poet who lives in a city which is taken over by a tyrant king, and this king is horrific. He murders a lot of people quite brutally, and he's a horrible person to rule under. But he tasked this poet with translating this ancient work, and the poet decides to kind of weave in some rebellion into his translation, which I think was a very interesting thing to do. I liked seeing a form of rebellion that wasn't, you know, a Katniss, I must lead a whole revolution that is based on fighting back actively. Like, there is a room for that kind of rebellion, but it was interesting to see a quiet, words have power rebellion. And I didn't like this book though. I really didn't like this book. I thought it to be incredibly boring. The writing was incredibly beautiful, but it was incredibly boring because it felt like, you know, as you know, you're following a poet, he's not doing much in terms of great action, and the plot did get a bit repetitive. Every time he faced the king, he got scared, and then something happened with the king, and it wasn't as bad as he thought it was going to be. Rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. I didn't like our main character. He treats some people very badly, specifically his wife. I also didn't like the romance in this one. I feel like the romance in this one wasn't a romance at all, because the romantic relationship was based on her having an impression of him in her head, and if he didn't live up to that impression, she wasn't interested in him, which meant that he had to live in a way that wasn't him, his own personal self. He had to try and pretend to be someone else for her the entire time, and it was trying to sell this book to me as that being a good romance, but it isn't. So I wasn't happy with the romance, I didn't like the characters, and I found the plot to be boring. So there wasn't anything much to like. Also, when we were discussing this one in class, we had a South Asian student who said that she found the depiction of Sri Lanka in this one to be based on some stereotypical elements of Sri Lanka. However, the author also lives in Sri Lanka and was living in Sri Lanka when writing this, so just letting you know that, and you can make your own opinions. I did think it did a beautiful job of painting Sri Lanka, but then again, I've never been to Sri Lanka and I don't know what Sri Lankan culture is like, so I can't say. The next book I have to talk about here is Manhattan Transfer by John Dos Passos. I love to tell you what this book is about, but you know, was it really about anything? That is the question. So this is a modernity kind of book, so it's written in the modernity style of fragmenting the story, so you get like zoom in and zoom outs of different people's life as they live in New York. So you go to one random character and you see a snapshot of their life, then you go to another random character and another and another and another, so you can get the picture. There's no like concrete narrative that you're following, it's more so you're learning about New York City from these different perspectives. That was just boring to me because I want a narrative to my story. I don't want to just see New York City from all of these different perspectives. I want there to be more of a concrete, solidified connection between all of the stories. I did get that it was bringing across themes of the American dream, how it works for some people, how it fails certain people, how it's difficult for immigrants to acclimatize to life in New York City, but it was so fragmented and boring. The only way that I could finish reading this book for class was to listen to an audiobook on Script. I've been using Script more lately, and if you would like to join Script and get 60 days free, you can click the link down below, and I also get a couple of free days, so that's very nice. And that was the only way I was ever going to finish this incredibly boring book. Last but not least, it's time to talk about my Shakespeare Sundays. There were 4 Sundays in October, and every Sunday I read a Shakespeare play, and that's called Shakespeare's Sunday, and I'm going to talk about the 4 Shakespeare plays that I read last month. The first Shakespeare play that I read was Henry VIII by William Shakespeare, and I was very excited to read this one because I thought it was going to bring all the drama that Henry VIII brought. Well, not drama, tragedy and horror, but it was so propaganda that my mind couldn't even take. It was so ridiculous. It was so written in a way. Wow, that really hurt. Shakespeare, after all we've been through, just hit me like that. Don't fall. Henry VIII was so obviously propaganda that my mind could barely wrap around it. You had characters that were being sent off to their execution, but they were still praising England and still praising the king, even though the king was the one who was sending them off to be murdered. It was just absolute rubbish. All of it was rubbish, and I know that the other history plays are also inaccurate, but this was an inaccuracy that I couldn't get away from because it was just glorifying Henry VIII, and I'm not here for that. So I really hated the play. Like, even his wife, who was being exiled, was like, oh, even though he's exiling me and I'm gonna not have the life that I had before and have to leave everything behind, the king is still right. And I was like, no, just stop, please, just stop. And then the other 3 plays, 2 of them had ghosts in them, which were Cymbeline and Richard III, so they fulfilled the undead character prompt for Gothtober because they had ghosts in them. So first of all, I'm going to talk about Richard III, which I absolutely loved. I was thinking that my last history play was going to be bad because Richard II was awful, but Richard III was fantastic. Again, it's kind of like, forget history play, it's more another one of Shakespeare's dramas that is like lightly sprinkled with names from history. So Richard III is an absolute villain. He is cunning, he is manipulative, and he is pure evil incarnate, and I kind of loved it. He was so evil and just doing all of the bad plots that it was entertaining to follow his story, and he kind of stole the show by being so bad. I'm sure there were other good things in this play, but I did read it like towards the beginning of the month, and I can't remember anything except for Richard III being iconic, and I think that's the main thing you need to take away from the play anyway. After that I read Cymbeline, which is following this king and his kingdom, and he kind of has a daughter who he wants to marry a certain person, but the daughter doesn't want to marry this person. And yeah, lots of drama happens, typical Shakespeare drama with the typical Shakespeare tropes such as, you know, poisoning, forbidden lovers, ghosts are coming in, rivalries, an evil person behind the scenes. Wow, never saw that coming, Shakespeare. But it was just so fun, and all of it fell together in an ending that quite echoes that of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and it just made me so happy because it was everything stereotypically Shakespeare dramatic and fun. I also think that this book had some queer undertones which I think are underrated. People always say like Twelfth Night is the play for Shakespeare's queer undertones, but I feel like Cymbeline really brings it to the table in a more obvious way. Lastly, I read Timon of Athens, and this is a play which is quite satirical. It's about this guy who's really rich, and he always gives away his money, kind of like Gansey, you know, always giving away his money to all of his friends, but his friends are all snakes. So once he goes bankrupt, his friends refuse to give him any of the wealth that he's, you know, helped and contributed to them having, and they're all snakes and turn away from him, and he tries to seek revenge on them and ends up being very bitter. And it's all about kind of how, you know, greedy humans can be and how humans choke any kindness that there is in the world until that kindness turns into bitterness. I did think that message was done really well, but it did drag a little bit in the beginning even though it's such a short play, and there is this secondary plotline that doesn't relate to the main plotline whatsoever. I do not see how those two connect, but you know, it was still a pretty good read and a quick read, and I enjoyed it. So there you have it. Those are all the 16 books that I read in the month of October. It was actually a really good reading month, and I had some down books, but I also had some up books up there that joined my new favourites. So please let me know in the comment section down below what was your favourite read in the month of October. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't you forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!